Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into something that is really complex and, honestly, something that I know you're all really interested in based on all the research that you sent.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the economic fallout of all these wildfires that keep happening in California.
Yeah.
You know, it's one thing to think about just the cost of like putting out the flames,
Right.
but the research that you guys have sent in, it's clear that it goes so far beyond that.
Oh, yeah.
The financial ripples, they just go on and on and on. I mean, just last year alone, the state had over 2.5 million acres
Wow.
scorched. So how are these fires actually like, I guess, reshaping California's economy?
Well, I mean, it's really a domino effect. I
Yeah.
mean, it impacts everything from insurance and housing to, like you said, entire industries.
Right.
But, I think it often starts with what a lot of people consider to be their biggest asset, their homes.
Yeah, of course.
Imagine you own a home in California and suddenly you're being told by these major insurance companies, the ones you've heard of.
Right, the ones you trust.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That they just won't insure you anymore
Wow.
because the wildfire risk is too high.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a reality for a lot
Yeah,
of
so
them.
that's going to be terrifying for people.
Absolutely.
But what are people supposed to do in that situation?
Right.
From the research that you sent, it seems like a lot of them are being forced into California's FAIR plan. But that's supposed to be like a last resort, right?
It is.
It's not supposed to be the primary insurer for so many people.
No, not at all. The FAIR Plan is actually, it's a state-mandated insurance pool. And it's really designed to be, like you said, a safety net for
Yep.
those who just can't find coverage in the traditional market.
Okay.
But because so many of the big insurance companies, they're pulling out of these high-risk areas,
Right.
the FAIR Plan's becoming the only option
For a lot of people.
for a growing number of Californians.
Yeah.
And it comes with, a pretty hefty price tag.
So not only are people losing their homes to these fires,
Yeah.
but then they're being hit with these, like, sky-high insurance costs.
Yes.
That just seems like a recipe for disaster,
It is. It's a huge financial burden.
especially for people who are already struggling.
Absolutely. And it contributes to, another major issue California's dealing with, the housing crisis.
Of course, yeah.
We're seeing a decrease in property values
Mm-hmm.
in these high-risk areas,
Mm-hmm.
partly because, potential buyers are scared off
Right.
by this lack of insurance options.
Totally.
And then this decrease in property values, it impacts local governments.
How so?
Well, their revenue streams shrink, which means they have less money to spend on things like schools and infrastructure,
Oh, wow.
even essential services.
So it's just this, like, awful cycle.
It really is. It's a cycle that's really hard to break.
It's like one problem just feeds into the next. And then on top of all that, there's the actual cost of rebuilding after a fire.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking labor shortages,
Right.
inflated costs for materials, and then the permitting processes, they can take forever.
That takes a very long time.
It's got to be a nightmare for anyone.
It is. The reconstruction process is incredibly slow and expensive.
Yeah,
I mean, if you think about the Camp Fire back in 2018,
right.
the one that basically, wiped the town of Paradise off the map,
Mm-hmm.
the estimated damages were $16.5 billion.
Wow.
That's just one fire.
That's a staggering amount of money.
Yeah.
It's hard to even imagine what the total cost is.
It's hard to wrap your head around it.
Yeah, year after year.
Right. And remember, too, we're not even just talking about homeowners here.
Right, of course, there are lots of renters in California.
Renters are often left with absolutely nothing after a fire.
Yeah,
And they face this brutal rental market
right.
in a state that already has a massive housing shortage. A lot of people end up in shelters or, worse, on the streets.
It's awful.
It's a crisis on top of a crisis.
Yeah. And then you add on to that, all of the businesses that are forced to shut down,
hmm
sometimes even permanently.
Yes. And one industry that's been hit particularly hard is agriculture.
Oh, of course.
California's agricultural industry, it's a cornerstone of its economy.
All right.
But it suffers billions in losses
Yeah.
due to destroyed crops.
Yeah.
Vineyards that can't produce sellable product.
Right, because of the smoke.
Yeah, the smoke taint. It's devastating for farmers, workers, and entire communities that rely on agriculture.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge part of the state's economy.
It is.
And it's not even just the direct losses, but it's the disruption of the supply chain, the long-term effects on industries like tourism.
Oh, yeah.
People might be hesitant to visit areas that have been, ravaged by these fires,
Absolutely.
which further hurts the local economy.
Right, the ripple effects are huge.
Yeah, it's like you're throwing a stone into a pond and the waves just keep spreading outward.
It's a good analogy.
Yeah, this is a good place for us to stop and move on to the next part of our conversation.
Okay.
But it's already so clear that these fires, they're having a massive impact on California's economy.
Yeah.
And I don't even think it's just a California problem, is it?
No, I don't think so.
It feels like this is something that affects everyone in one way or another.
Definitely. Yeah, it's definitely a national issue, especially when we're seeing these mega fires becoming more and more common in other parts of the West, too.
Right.
But sticking with California for now, let's kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about the costs of actually fighting these fires.
Okay.
One of the reports you sent over mentioned that California spent over $3 billion just on firefighting efforts in 2022 alone.
And I imagine that number, that's probably just like the direct costs. Right, like the personnel and the equipment and the resources that are actually used to put out the fires. It doesn't even include all the other costs, the ones we were talking about, like disaster relief and health care for people who are affected by the smoke from the fires and rebuilding all the damaged infrastructure.
Yeah, it really just scratches the surface.
Right.
We also need to factor in, things like lost productivity and property damage and the strain on public resources.
Right.
I mean, the true cost is probably way higher than what those initial figures even suggest.
Oh, for sure.
And this kind of brings us to a really crucial question, what role does climate change play in all of this?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It feels like every time there's one of these major wildfires, everyone starts talking about climate change.
Right.
But is there really a direct link?
Well, the science is pretty clear on this one.
Okay.
Climate change is acting as what they call a threat multiplier.
Okay.
It's basically creating the perfect conditions for these megafires to just ignite and spread like crazy. We're talking about hotter temperatures, longer droughts, and these really extreme wind events. That can turn what starts as a small fire into something massive in just a few hours.
So it's not just bad luck or even like poor forest management.
Yeah.
It's these fires are happening more often and they're more intense because our climate is changing.
Exactly.
Which I guess means that all this economic fallout is just going to keep getting worse.
It will.
Unless we start to do something about the root cause of the problem.
Absolutely. And that's where things get really complicated.
Yeah. How so?
Because even if we could just magically stop climate change right now,
okay,
we're still going to be dealing with the effects of all the past emissions for decades to come.
Oh, wow.
So we really need to be thinking about two things. How to reduce our impact on the climate in the future,
right?
But also how to live with the changes that are already happening right now.
That makes sense. So what does that actually look like?
Yep.
I mean, what can we actually do to make California more resilient to these massive fires and maybe lessen the economic damage?
Well, one of the big things that keeps coming up in the research is this idea of completely changing the insurance market.
Really?
Because, like we were talking about earlier, the system that we have right now, it's just not working.
Yeah.
Way too many homeowners are ending up without coverage.
Right.
And the people who can actually get insurance end up paying these crazy premiums.
Yeah, it feels like a pretty basic thing to fix, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if people can't even get affordable insurance or any insurance at all, then it's just going to make the economic damage even worse when a fire does happen.
Absolutely. And some of the experts are suggesting some pretty big changes.
Like what?
Like creating a state-backed insurance program specifically for wildfire risk. Sort of like a safety net.
Okay.
For homeowners in high-risk areas. So everyone has access to at least some coverage.
That's interesting, but wouldn't that be incredibly expensive for the state?
It definitely would.
To manage, especially since climate change is making these fires worse, more frequent, more destructive.
It would be a big investment.
Yeah.
But the argument is that doing nothing is going to be even more expensive in the long run.
Oh, I see.
Think about all the money that the state already spends on things like firefighting and disaster relief and rebuilding after these fires.
Okay, yeah.
And that's not even counting all those indirect costs we talked about.
Right.
Like lost productivity and economic disruption.
Okay, so it's like we're spending all this money after the fires happen.
Exactly.
But maybe we should be spending more money beforehand to try and prevent them or reduce the risk.
Yeah, it's a pay now or pay later kind of situation.
Right.
But on a much bigger scale.
Exactly, yeah. So it's about shifting from being reactive to being more proactive.
Precisely.
And that means not just insurance reform, but also things like, what, forest management,
Yeah.
controlled burns, and community fire prevention programs.
That makes sense.
You mentioned controlled burns earlier.
Yeah.
And I know they've been getting a lot of attention lately.
They have.
But aren't those kind of controversial?
Yeah, to an extent.
I remember reading some stuff about people being concerned about the air quality
Yeah,
and the risk that they could get out of control.
right. They're definitely not risk-free.
Yeah.
But the science is pretty clear that controlled burns are a really important tool for reducing wildfire risk,
Okay.
especially in places where there's a lot of dense undergrowth.
Mm-hmm.
It's about finding that right balance.
Yeah.
Using them strategically,
Okay.
making sure that they're done safely and effectively.
So it's not like a perfect solution,
No.
but it's something that could be part of a larger strategy
Yeah,
to make our forests less susceptible to these big fires.
exactly.
So what else?
Yeah.
What else is being considered?
Well, another big focus is on building more resilient communities.
Okay.
So that means updating building codes to make houses more fire resistant.
Like what kind of stuff?
Well, fire-resistant roofing materials, ember-proof vents,
Mm-hmm.
and just making sure that there's defensible space around homes.
Right. Get rid of all that dry brush.
Yeah, clearing away all the flammable vegetation.
I've actually seen some of that stuff being done in
Yeah.
communities that have been hit hard by fires. Like
yeah.
you're fireproofing your house
Exactly.
from the outside in.
It is. It's about incorporating fire-resistant design
Mm-hmm.
into everything we build,
Wow.
from individual homes to whole neighborhoods.
That's amazing.
And it also includes things like better early warning systems
Oh, right.
and more efficient evacuation plans
Yeah, okay.
and community education programs
Yeah.
so that people know how to be prepared and what to do when a wildfire happens.
That all makes sense. But all of this stuff, it's going to cost a lot of money
It will,
and a lot of people working together.
It's a massive undertaking, for sure.
I mean, are we talking about like completely changing how California deals with wildfire risk?
It is a huge shift. But what's encouraging is that a lot more people are starting to realize that what we're doing now just isn't working.
Right.
People are starting to see that this isn't just an environmental problem.
It's more than that.
It's an economic problem. It's a social problem. It's a public health problem.
Yeah.
It affects all of us.
I'm seeing that in the research, too. It's
Yeah.
like there's this new sense of urgency that wasn't there before.
Right.
People are realizing that we can't just wait for the next fire to happen
Exactly.
and then react.
Right.
We have to be proactive and start doing things that will protect California in
Mhm.
the long term.
And that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah, why?
Because it's not just about spending a ton of money.
Okay.
It's about coming up with really smart solutions
Mm-hmm.
that get to the root of these fires
Right.
and all the damage they cause.
So for a listener who's been looking at all this research,
Yeah.
what's the takeaway here? What's the one thing they need to know about the economic fallout of these California wildfires?
I think the biggest takeaway here is that this isn't just about, dollars and cents.
It's about people.
Yeah. People's lives, their livelihoods, their communities.
Right. These fires, they're causing real pain.
Mm-hmm.
And the economic fallout, it seems like it always hits the people who are already struggling the hardest.
Absolutely. You can't talk about the economic impact of these fires without talking about how they affect low-income communities,
Right.
communities of color,
Mm-hmm.
vulnerable populations.
Right. It's like these fires are just making existing social problems even worse,
Exactly.
which means we really need to find solutions.
We do.
The good news is that people are working on it. There's some really interesting ideas out there.
Mm-hmm.
And people are starting to realize that we need to change how we think about wildfire risk.
And that's where our listener comes in.
Yeah.
They've done all this research. They're learning about this really complex issue.
Right.
So now the question is, what are they going to do with all this knowledge?
That's a great question. It's not enough to just be aware of the problem.
No.
We need to be part of the solution.
Right.
So for everyone listening, we want to challenge you to think about what you think the most impactful solutions could be.
Yeah. If you were in charge, where would you put the resources?
Mm-hmm.
Would you focus on fixing the insurance market,
Okay.
investing in more resilient infrastructure,
Yeah.
supporting those community-based fire prevention programs?
Those are tough choices.
They are.
There's no easy answer here.
No.
It's going to take all of us working together.
It will.
And it's not just about the government doing things either.
Right.
We all have a role to play in this.
Absolutely. I mean, whether it's contacting your elected officials,
Right.
supporting organizations that are working on this issue,
Yeah.
even just having conversations with your friends and family,
Yeah.
every little bit helps.
Because at the end of the day, these fires affect all of us,
They do.
whether we live in California or not,
It's a global issue.
with global consequences.
Yeah, the more people who understand what's going on and get involved,
Yeah.
the better chance we have of finding solutions.
And creating a better future.
Exactly.
So, that wraps up our deep dive into the economic fallout of California's wildfires.
It's a tough topic.
It is. It's complicated.
But there's also a lot of hope
Yeah.
because there's so much potential for positive change.
I want to thank everyone for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
And a special thanks to our listener for suggesting this topic.
Absolutely.
We hope this has given you a better understanding of this complex issue and inspired you to get involved.
Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions,
Yeah.
and keep diving deep.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.